You got to trust that God is your provider. You have to come to this place where you say, God, I hold this all loosely. God, I only want what you want to pour into my life. If this isn't it, you got something else. So God, I trust that you own it all anyway. Good morning, Lake City. So glad that you're here. Happy Father's Day to all the fathers that are out there. You know, I am so blessed to have a father that he just figured out things. He knew how to fix things. Matter of fact, he could even, under the worst of circumstances, figure out how to make something like not great favorable, right? I mean, I remember a time he bought a donkey from an old farmer, and this farmer said he'd deliver the donkey the next day, and the next day he shows up, but the farmer says to my dad, you know what, I'm sorry, bad news. He said, you know, the donkey died. My dad said, well, then just give me my $100 back. He goes, I can't, I already spent it. He said, you spent it? I mean, well, then just bring me the donkey. He said, well, it's a dead donkey. He said, well, I'm going to sell it. He said, you can't sell a dead donkey. My dad said, well, watch me. So a couple months later, this old farmer runs into my dad and says, so what happened with the dead donkey? And he goes, well, I came out $898 ahead. How in the world did you do that? He said, I raffled the donkey. He said, yeah, I raffled off 500 tickets, $2 a piece, and raffled the donkey. He goes, well, weren't they mad when they found out that the donkey was dead? And he goes, only the guy that won. I just gave him his $2 back. See, I would have never now that was a joke, by the way. That did not happen to my dad, you know. I could see my dad coming up with something like that, though, right? I mean, dads just have a way of figuring out, you know, how to turn, like, lemons into lemonade. But anyways, happy Father's Day to all of you. Hey, before I get into my message today, let me just say that we're so excited to be welcoming a new staff member. Jared and Natalie Wright are going to be joining us, and they're taking on the role of youth pastor here for our students. And so we're so excited. They're going to be here the first week in July. So just wanted to let you know that, and when they get here, we'll introduce you personally to them. But very excited to have this young couple join our team. They just recently got married this year, and so you know, they're young and enthusiastic and ready to go. And so we're very, very excited about Jared and Natalie joining our team. Well, we're in a series right now called The Heart of the Matter, and we're in this series through the Sermon on the Mount. And throughout the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus is identifying issues that really drive behavior. So he wants to make sure that his audience understand it's not just about external compliance. It's not just about us, like, fulfilling the letter of the law. It's really about these issues beneath the surface that really drive our behavior. For example, he says, it's not just about murder. It's about mismanaged anger that can actually lead to murder. It's not just about adultery. It's about lust and mismanaged sexuality that can lead to adultery. So he goes beneath the surface of our behavior, and he gets down to the core issues, the heart of the matter. That's what he wants to do. Now today, I've entitled my message, Constructive Conversations. Constructive Conversations. Now, how many of you have heard the term constructive criticism? Have you heard that term, constructive criticism? I find that an interesting term, and it's one that I'm not sure I buy, okay? The whole idea, criticism, let me give you a couple of words that mean criticism, okay? Criticism, disapproval, condemnation, blame. So these are synonyms for the word criticism. So here's what we do. We wind up throwing a word like constructive on the front end of that term to try to kind of say, listen, I'm just trying to help. Right? I'm just trying to help, but I'm going to criticize you constructively because I really want to help. But what it does is it really kind of gives us license to just start pointing out faults in people, and it really doesn't, you know, our positive spin doesn't make up for our lack of sensitivity. And oftentimes we try to hide behind this idea of constructive criticism, but it doesn't really produce our desired outcome. So Jesus comes along and he says, let me help you with this. I want to help you learn how to engage in conversations where you have to maybe point something out, but there's a way for you to do it that will actually be beneficial to the people. Because when you come off as just being critical, that doesn't help anybody. I remember this guy at our church in Seattle. In fact, Les Welk was with us just a couple of weeks ago celebrating our launch into our legacy year, and it was so great to have Les here with us. I served on staff with him for 7 years, and so we had him over to the house, and we were reminiscing about the good old days, those days at Shoreline Community Church, and we got onto this one individual that was in our church creating all kinds of problems. And so Les told me that there was a moment where actually this guy was kind of coming after him. And the pastor, our senior pastor, at that time Les was the associate pastor and I was the youth pastor, and we had a senior pastor who was nearing retirement, but he was just hearing about this guy all the time, and he was going to all of these different ministry areas and just very critical about everything. And so the pastor said, I'm going to call this guy into my office and tell him to knock it off. So he did. So he calls him into his office to tell him to knock it off or, find another place to worship. And so this guy comes in, and during the course of this conversation, this guy starts going after Pastor Les. And he says to the senior pastor, he says, you can't tell me that Welk guy doesn't have his hair cut by a woman. That's an issue? Evidently, he was coming from this place where it would be inappropriate for a man to have a haircut by anything other than a barber, right? And so the pastor said, well, I know for a fact that he does have his hair cut by a woman. His wife cuts his hair. And furthermore, let me say that when you refer to him, you need to refer to him as Pastor Welk, because he is a godly young man and he deserves your respect. And in that moment, he got really quiet. And he said, well, Pastor, I do respect you. And if you believe him to be a godly man, then I will respect him because I respect you. And then he got very emotional and he said, no one has ever referred to me as a godly man, not even my own children. And I thought, I believe that. I believe that because here is a guy who was so spiritually arrogant that he was obnoxious. He carried himself with such spiritual pride and like he knew it all, and he was the guy that was going to point out the fault in everyone else. Yeah, I completely believe that. He was very much aware of the perceived weaknesses of people all around him, but he had no idea. He was completely oblivious to his own faults and failures and shortcomings. This is what Jesus wants to get at today. We're going to be looking at Matthew chapter 7, verses 1 through 6. I'm going to read those verses, then we'll come back and we'll unpack them. Here's what Jesus wants his followers to know. He says in verse 1, do not judge others, and you will not be judged, for you will be treated as you treat others. The standard you use in judging is the standard by which you will be judged. And why worry about a speck in your friend's eye when you have a log in your own? How can you think of saying to your friend, let me help you get rid of that speck in your eye, when you can't see past the log in your own eye? Hypocrite. First, get rid of the log in your own eye. Then you will see well enough to deal with the speck in your friend's eye. Don't waste what is holy on people who are unholy, and don't throw your pearls to pigs. They will trample the pearls and then turn and attack you. Hey, this is really great advice because you and I are going to be inevitably in tension-filled conversations. Matter of fact, even this morning, as we talk about this, there might be a person that comes to mind, a conversation that is just kind of out there on the horizon, something that you know you need to address. And so these words are going to be very important for you to hear, because Jesus wants to help us navigate these tension-filled conversations. Now, first of all, before we get into unpacking what he said, let's talk about what he didn't say, okay? What he didn't say was we're to just avoid these conversations. He didn't say that. We're not to bury our head in the sand and just avoid them. We're not going to take an approach that just says, hey, none of my business, you know. We're not to do that. Nor are we to approach these things in a way where we're naive or we just blindly follow people that are wrong. You know, it's not about just believing with absolutely no discernment. In fact, we're called to be discerning people, and especially when it comes to spiritual things. In fact, look what Jesus says just a few verses later in verse 15. He says, "Beware of false prophets who come disguised as harmless sheep, but are really vicious wolves." Yeah, so we need to make sure that we have a discerning heart, but we need to make sure that when we address people, we don't do so with spiritual arrogancy, but rather a genuine sense of humility. So as we approach people to have these kinds of conversations, we want to be helpful, right? We don't want to come across in a judgmental way. And so here's how Jesus can help us, okay? Here's the first thought that he shares with us. Number one, if you're taking notes, number one, treat people the way you want to be treated. Think about that. Treat people the way you want to be treated. I mean, you don't want people to just come at you and point out all your faults, right? You don't want people speaking to you in a condescending way as if they have all the answers and you're completely ignorant. So treat people in the way you want to be treated. Look at what he says here in Matthew 7, verses 1 and 2. "Do not judge others, and you will not be judged, for you will be treated as you treat others. The standard you use in judging is the standard by which you will be judged." So how do you want to be treated? Do you want people to assume the worst of you or give you the benefit of the doubt? Do you want people to hold you to some unrealistic standard of perfection, or would you rather them to extend you grace for your imperfections? So we need to think through, how would we want people to relate to us, and then we relate to them in that way? Now, this is really a theme that Jesus is revisiting that has run throughout the Sermon on the Mount. It's this idea that there's a reciprocal nature to some of these spiritual principles. In other words, remember when he said, "Blessed are the merciful, they shall receive mercy," right? So when you're merciful, you receive mercy. "Forgive us our trespasses as we forgive those who trespass against us." There's a reciprocal nature that as we deal with people, others deal with us. Matter of fact, it's not just restricted to this horizontal level. It's actually, it comes into play in this vertical level as well. In fact, we know that God sees everything, right? So look what it says here in Hebrews chapter 4, verse 13. "Nothing in all creation is hidden from God. Everything is naked and exposed before his eyes, and he is the one whom we are accountable." So we're accountable to God, and he sees everything. So we can come off as being like really spiritually all together, and we can carry ourselves in a real spiritually arrogant sort of way, but God sees, doesn't he? God sees it all. And he's the one that we're going to be held accountable to. There will be no spiritually arrogant people standing before God on Judgment Day. Only people in desperate need of mercy. All of us. And then look what it says here in James chapter 2, verse 13. But if you have been merciful, God will be merciful when he judges you. You know, I find it much easier to be merciful towards people when I better understand their story. I think we all are on a journey, and we all have a certain map accompanying that journey. I mean, we've all navigated certain terrain. I think we make a big mistake when we superimpose our map on someone else's journey. Because, listen, we make all kinds of assumptions about people based on our own personal experience. And so because this has been our experience, and this is how we've navigated things, and this has been our disposition, and this is our worldview based on what we've experienced, well, then we take that and we universally apply that across the board, and that's the reason why we don't get other people. We think, what is wrong with these people? We look at things so clearly from our vantage point, but we fail to recognize that we have a very unique map. We've experienced things from a unique perspective. And for us then to superimpose our unique map and our perspective on someone else and then judge them based on our perspective, it's simply not fair. These people have navigated terrain that you and I have not had to navigate. We've navigated terrain that they haven't had to navigate. An Idaho map is only good in Idaho. It's not good in Oregon. So we need to be careful not to superimpose our map's journey on someone else. So we need to seek understanding. We need to ask more questions than make statements. I can't tell you how many times I have made a statement based on something I knew. I had limited knowledge, right? Because we know what we know and we don't know what we don't know. And so I have limited knowledge and I make a statement based on this knowledge, only to find out down the road that there was something that I did not know at the time when I made the statement. And I've said to myself, oh, well, that's a game changer. Had I known that then, I wouldn't have said what I said. Have you ever had one of those moments where you recognize that you jumped a chasm, you made some statements based on limited understanding, you didn't have all the information, and so you jumped the chasm and you made a statement only to find out later that you didn't know everything, and then you go and you revisit what you said and you think, oh gosh, I wished I would have known that. I would have never said that. I would have never said that knowing that. That's our problem. See, we need to come to a place where we recognize that we have such limited knowledge. So we need to not superimpose our map on other people, and we need to stay out of judgment and stay into curiosity. Stay out of judgment. Stay out of judgment. Stop judging people. Stay into curiosity. Ask more questions. It's really, it's amazing what you can learn about people, and especially people that are really different than you are. It's amazing what you can learn. By just simply, when you encounter someone who's landing in a different place than you land, just by simply asking a question. Well, now that's really interesting. So that's a perspective that's different for me to consider. Help me understand how you got there. Give me some insight into the path that you've traveled that has led you to this perspective in this position, and then just shut up and listen. It's amazing what you can learn because people are the way they are for reasons. People believe what they believe for reasons, and their journey is very different than your journey. And so when you really have them as your focus and you really care and you're concerned about people, then you want to become a student of people. You want to learn. Stay out of judgment. Stay into curiosity. Ask more questions than make statements. Treat people the way you would want to be treated. You don't want people to assume a bunch of things about you based on misinformation or a lack of information. So let's extend the same courtesy. Treat people the way you want to be treated. Here's number 2. Admit your inability to see everything clearly. Admit your inability to see everything clearly. Again, I think this is probably the strongest argument for us not being judges. Like we don't see everything clearly. We can't. We're not all-knowing. It's the reason why God is the only righteous judge. God sees it all. God knows all. We are limited in what we know. We just need to come to that realization. There is so much about a person we don't know. We can see the external things, right? But we don't know the details about their journey. We don't know the motivations of their heart. We're just focused on external things that we can know. I love the story about when Samuel was given the task by God to find a new king for Israel following King Saul. And he was told to go to Bethlehem to the house of Jesse, and he would find the new king as one of Jesse's sons. And so he goes, and he sees Jesse's oldest son, and he immediately, based on just external appearance, he goes, this must be the new king, right? He was pretty impressive. But look what God says to him in 1 Samuel 16, verse 7. But the Lord said to Samuel, don't judge by his appearance or height, for I have rejected him. The Lord doesn't see things the way you see them. People judge by outward appearances, but the Lord looks at the heart. See, we can only see the external. We don't see the internal. And besides that, we have a seriously obstructed view of things. Not only are we limited in what we know, but we have a huge obstruction. That's why Jesus says what he says in verse 3. He says, and why worry about a speck in your friend's eye when you have a log in your own? Hey, listen, we all have issues, right? We all have issues. We have family of origin issues. We have brokenness issues. We have unconfessed sin issues. We are a bundle of issues. Matter of fact, if we say that that's not, look what it says here in 1 John 1:8. If we claim we have no sin, we're only fooling ourselves and not living in the truth. There are a lot of people that live in denial. People that carry themselves in a spiritually arrogant sort of way are just not living in reality. The truth is, we have some serious issues, and it kind of becomes like a log in our own eye, so much to the point where it's impossible for us to help others. That's the reason why Jesus recommends humility. He says we need to humble ourselves and acknowledge the fact that we've got this big log in our eye. That's why he says what he says here in verse 5. He says, first, get rid of the log in your own eye, then you will see well enough to deal with the speck in your friend's eye. We can recognize other people's issues, but we have a harder time recognize our own. And it really does require humility to come to a place of acknowledging that we have our own issues. And it's that place of humility that really postures us to be able to help people more effectively. We have to admit that our perspective has been distorted by our issues and then begin to deal with them. And honestly, it's becoming increasingly difficult for us to identify the log in our eye. It's becoming really hard. We live in a culture that is polarized. I mean, I don't know if you've picked up on that. You know, we live in extreme polarization, and it's getting more and more extreme. It's hard for us to even recognize some of the logs and the issues in our own eye to be able to address anybody else's speck. I was reading this week about this concept of an echo chamber. Have you heard of this? An echo chamber. This echo chamber concept was developed back in the 1960s by a political scientist by the name of V.O. Key. What he discovered is that when people got their information from a single media source, it dramatically impacted their voting. That when they got their information from a single media source, it impacted how they voted. Now, this concept of the echo chamber really gained traction when cable news networks began to appear. The 24/7 news cycle, it really gained traction because now people could go to their preferential place for news. And what they've discovered, social scientists have discovered that people who give themselves to this channel have a very different perspective on reality than people who go to this channel. And so you've got these two channels that are churning out very different perspectives on reality. Then it became even more defined with the internet. Because on the internet, you can go to websites, blogs, podcasts, where you surround yourself with like-minded people and you completely eliminate the opposition, the opposing view. You just now surround yourself with like-minded people. And then it took on a whole new definition on social media platforms when large tech companies began to introduce algorithms, and algorithms simply pick up on your natural tendencies. My social media feed has been flooded with shoes. I made the mistake of clicking on an ad. And now they think that all I'm really interested in is shoes. And the problem is I am interested in shoes. I like shoes. And so then I click on another one and it only confirms what they know now to be my predisposition towards shoes. And so they just feed me more shoes. I'm getting boats because I like boats. And so I'll click on a boat ad and then they send me more boats. My social media platform is filled with shoes and boats. Here's what you need to know though. Every article you click on that is in alignment with your worldview, they then register that and they begin to feed you more articles that are just like that. And you get more of them and more of them and more of them. And this is happening on both sides of the political aisle. On both sides. And so what's happening is when you think you're doing research, you're actually going further and further and further down a rabbit hole of stuff that's being fed to you based on the algorithms that they've picked up on, that these are your natural tendencies. And so they're taking you further and further away. And here's what's happening. We're growing further and further apart. It's happening on both sides of the aisle. Matter of fact, in this book that I'm reading, and I'm not all the way through it yet, so I can't really recommend it, but I'm going to lift a paragraph out of it because I think it's really, really important for us to wrap our brain around. I just want to be the guy waving the flag at the top of the cliff. That's what I want to do. I want to be the guy waving the flag at the top of the cliff and saying, this is a cliff. And if you're not careful, you're going to go careening off this cliff, and it's not going to end well. So I just want to be the guy waving the flag. Listen to what he says. It's in the book called Breaking the Social Media Prism by Chris Bale. He's a professor of sociology at Duke University. Here's what he writes. The more we are exposed to information from our side, the more we think our system of beliefs is just, rational, and truthful. As we get pulled deeper into the networks that include only like-minded people, we begin to lose perspective. We fail to recognize that there are two sides to every story, or we begin listening to different stories altogether. Echo chambers have their most pernicious effect, common wisdom suggests, when people are unaware of them. When people think they're doing research about an issue, but they are actually listening to what they want to hear. When we encounter people from the other side, their views can therefore seem irrational, self-serving, or perhaps most troubling, untrue. If we could only step outside our echo chambers, many people argue, political polarization would plummet. That's worth wrestling with. That's worth considering. It's becoming increasingly difficult to even identify the log that's in our own eye, that's distorting our perspective. And what we need to do is we need to step outside of some of those echo chambers and begin to have real conversations with people again. We need to start interacting with people again. And especially people that disagree with us. We need to start having conversations again. I was having this conversation just this week, and I was talking to a gal who said all she did was acknowledge that this was a moment in time where for the first time in the history of our nation, we have a woman vice president. For the first time in the history of our country. All she did was acknowledge that, and what she didn't realize is that she had put up a political lightning rod, and she got bombarded by friends who just came after her with all kinds of kind of antagonistic comments, when all she was trying to do was acknowledge the historical significance of a moment. That was it. She was making no political statement. She is a conservative by way of political persuasion, but she was just acknowledging the historical significance. But here's what she said: I'll never do that again. Never do that again. What does it do? Shuts down the conversation. It pushes people to their extreme. You guys, I'm just telling you, as followers of Jesus, Jesus interacted with people that were very different than him. He interacted with people that didn't even believe who he was or what he was about. And yet he built a relational bridge with people. And I'm just telling you, as followers of Jesus, and I want to be the guy on the edge of the cliff just waving a flag and just saying, listen, we need to be aware. Just be careful. Be careful. Have real conversations with real people. They might actually say something that makes sense to you. Can you imagine that? I mean, maybe they could actually say something that would cause you to go, When was the last time you went, When you were considering maybe another perspective where someone was coming, and you really seek to understand why that person might land where they're landing, and you're really becoming interested in who they are as people. Yeah, we just need to be very, very careful. We need to make sure that we are aware of the log in our own eye so that then we can begin to engage with people in a more meaningful conversation. And then my last point is just simply this. We need to discern the receptivity level. Discern the receptivity level. I love what he says here. And in verse 6, he says, don't waste what is holy on people who are unholy. Don't throw your pearls to pigs. They'll trample the pearls and turn and attack you. What's he saying? You may have something really valuable to say. But if the audience you want to say it to is not receptive, hang on to it. Why throw the pearls? It's like throwing expensive jewelry to pigs. Why would you do that? And by the way, we're not calling people who disagree with you pigs. Okay? This is called a metaphor, and he's trying to get a point across, and it's all about receptivity. It's all about understanding that sometimes it's better to hold your tongue because the timing's not right. What you have to say is too valuable to waste. What you have to say is meaningful, and it needs to be said. But how many of you know sometimes we blow a God idea for a lack of God's timing? Yeah, we blow a God idea for a lack of God's timing. And sometimes it's better to just hold what you want to say and wait for the right opportunity. Jesus was masterful at this. Of course, he was God, so he knew how to do things. I love the story of the woman at the well. He wanted to reveal himself to her. Remember the Samaritan woman? Remember she had come out and he wants to engage her in a conversation. He wants to reveal who he is to her, but he recognizes that she's probably not at a place to receive that. And so he engages her in a conversation. They talk about water, talk about living water. He talks about drawing water that you'll never thirst again. He actually is so masterful in this conversation that he actually leads her to a place where she asks him for the very information he wanted to say to her the whole time. That is such a great story. And we could learn a lot from that. Sometimes you have to hold back. He wanted to say this to her the whole time, but he kept it back here. He knew where he wanted to drive this conversation, but he knew that she wasn't ready yet. And then finally, when she asked him for what he wanted to say, he said, well, this is who I am. And he revealed himself. This requires tremendous discernment, great discipline. You have to really be in control of your emotions. And you have to have good emotional intelligence, and you have to have a discerning heart. You have to discern with wisdom. Is this a moment to have that conversation? Because if it's not, don't waste it. Too important, too valuable. Hang on to it. Wait for the right moment. And then when it comes, you'll be able to say, oh, thank you, Jesus, for navigating this conversation. And especially with people who think differently than we do, that don't operate in life with the same moral compass that we have. In fact, look what Paul wrote to the Colossians in Colossians chapter 4, verses 5 and 6. He says, live wisely among those who are not believers and make the most of every opportunity. Let your conversations be gracious and attractive so that you will have the right response for everyone. So good. Sometimes you got to hang on to what you want to say. Wait for receptivity. And then when God opens up that door, with wisdom, grace, humility, treating people the way you would want to be treated, understanding that you don't know it all, coming to terms with your own issues and your own brokenness, and dealing with the log in your own eye so that you can help someone with the speck in theirs. And when you do it that way, it totally changes your approach, and it changes their chance of receiving what it is you want to say. We can have constructive conversations. We can deal with hard things, tension-filled moments. We do it the way Jesus coaches us to do it. Would you all stand with me as we close in prayer? For some of you today, this has been a very timely message because you have a conversation that's on the horizon. You know it's coming. For some of you, this is an opportunity for you to pump the brakes a little bit. Kind of pump the brakes. Because you've been ready to go full steam ahead into a conversation that was not going to be characterized by humility or grace or empathy, understanding. You were about ready to superimpose your map on the other person, and you're about ready to lambaste them based on what you know to be true. Pump the brakes. Recalibrate. Pray for wisdom. Ask God for his perspective on even your own life and your own issues. Go there first. And then in humility, in the right time, allow God to give you that courage and approach people from a loving place where they know, even if you wind up agreeing to disagree, you can do so agreeably because of the way in which you approached it. Father, help us. Help us become a more accurate reflection of you. God, I pray that we could take some of these principles and incorporate them into our conversations that oftentimes go sideways and we blow them up because we've not navigated them in a way that you've encouraged us to. So God, I pray for every situation that is represented here today, every conversation that needs to be had. God, I pray that you would direct and you would lead, you would give wisdom and discernment. Pray in Jesus' name. And everyone said, amen. Amen. God bless you guys. Thank you so much for being here. Happy Father's Day, guys. Go out and have a hot dog and go try to throw that baseball out there with Jared. God bless you. We'll see you.